Louis, other than the tariffs and talk and action of onshoring certain industries in the United States, are you really hearing from a policy perspective that we will see United States, maybe Canada, reindustrialize? Are you seeing it from a
Look,
policy perspective?
I think that's a super important question, and I would say not yet. I would say that the tariffs are the first step. Now, we can look at the tariffs in one of two ways. We can say tariffs are a goal in themselves, in which case they'll just be a policy failure. All you're doing is slapping higher costs onto your consumer, or they're part of a bigger sort of industrial policy picture, a bigger scheme of things, where we do the tariffs to protect industries that we're going to help foster on the other side. Now, I think the reality, this is especially true, much more true for the US than for Canada, but uh, it's almost impossible to reindustrialize or industrialize uh, with a too strong a currency. Um, it's
Right.
you look at all the successful industrializations around the world, starting with just China the past 30 years, and it was always done under the shelter of a very cheap currency. Now, I think the big problem for the US right now is that the US dollar is massively overvalued. I'm sure some of your listeners, either in the US
Hmm.
or perhaps Canadians traveling to the US, and throughout my career, each time I went to the U.S. outside of New York City, things always felt cheap. My wife is from Oklahoma. We'd spend time there. I always felt when we went down there, I couldn't spend money if I tried. Um, but now, when I look at whenever I go to the U.S., I'm just floored by how expensive everything is: hotels, restaurants, um, relative to Europe and relative to Asia. Just for fun, go to
Yeah.
Expedia um, and look at the price of a Four Seasons in Beijing or Shanghai versus a Four Seasons in New York or San Francisco. The
Hmm.
Four Seasons in Beijing is going to be $200. In New York City is going to be $1,500. Um, and it's thing after thing. A small electric vehicle in China is $10,000. The BYD Seagull. Uh, a Nissan Leaf in the U.S., the cheapest electric vehicle is $30,000.
But Louis,
So
is that because of the dollar? Because you could also say things in Canada are also very expensive, and one could say,
they are.
well, look at all the extra taxes that have been imposed here, all the regulatory issues that we have as well. So, I mean, I know we're talking about the U.S. dollar, but is it the dollar that's driving this?
I think the dollar. Look, uh, there's many causes for the high costs, and yes, one of them is the cost of regulation, and yes, one of them is the cost of taxes. um, but I firmly believe, one of my favorite economists is a guy called Jacques Rueff. He was de Gaulle's primary economic advisors in the 50s and 60s. He was the guy who told de Gaulle to get the gold out uh, of the US in 65. And uh, Rueff would always say that currencies are the receptacle in which unearned rights accumulate. So, we can slap on extra taxes, we can slap on extra regulation. Deep down, that means that we hurt our productivity. And this should be reflected in the currency, because the currency is the ultimate variable of adjustment. Now, today you could say, well, the Canadian dollar is not very expensive, it's pretty cheap, and uh, yes, relative to the US, relative to your point, to anywhere you travel elsewhere, you come back to Canada, things feel pretty expensive. But
Yeah.
in the US, again, they feel massively, massively expensive. Um, Definitely against Asia. Today people go to Japan to go skiing because it's cheaper than to go from California, because it's cheaper than to going to Colorado. Um, I've got two teenage daughters. I actually just took them to Paris last weekend to go to the Taylor Swift concert, because it was
Oh
cheaper to
my.
fly them to Paris and get tickets in Paris than it was to get tickets in Vancouver. Uh,
Hmm. So
Madness,
what
right?
what does that
Uh,
then mean in terms of bringing it back to this industrializations and the commodity complex?
well, it means that if the U.S. is serious about industrializing, then you need to get a weaker dollar. There is no way that the U.S. can reindustrialize with the dollar where it is, and I think that's why pressure is now being put on Japan to get the yen higher, and that's why I think ultimately all the Asian currencies, including the renminbi, will have to go up a lot, because you know the pressure will be put on. Say, look, we're putting in tariffs now. If you don't revalue the renminbi, we'll raise the tariffs further. And the same will be told to the Koreans, to the Japanese. If the U.S. is serious about reindustrializing, it cannot do so with a strong dollar. So if the U.S. wants to reindustrialize, you've got to have a weaker dollar.
Okay, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.